Our next speaker is Aamer Anwar, who's the newly elected Rector for Glasgow University. He's also a human rights lawyer. So I'd like to welcome Aamer to the mic.
Thank you, Amjad. Assalamu alaikum, Ramadan Mubarak. Brothers and sisters, the purpose of these terror attacks is not only to change democracy that we take for granted, it's also to demoralize the people at whom it's aimed, to erode and to degrade their humanity. And what these people want to do is to drive us apart. They want to sow suspicion and fear. They want to force us to replace our freedoms with security, and they want us to answer them with bombs and bullets of our own. If any of this happens, then the terrorist mission is accomplished, and we have to do the exact opposite. We have to defy them by proving that this is not what we are. We saw the proof of that in abundance after Manchester, after London, when we saw our emergency services rush to save lives, not knowing if they were next. We saw that as Muslim and non-Muslim surgeons, nurses, police officers battled to save lives. We saw the humanity as taxi drivers offered free lifts home. We saw that as restaurants, and we saw that as ordinary people opened their doors and their homes to people who were affected. They deliberately attacked children. My daughter just asked me, she's 5 years old, why did they kill children? They deliberately attacked children in Manchester because they want to blind us with our outrage. They want us to forget our humanity and to lash out, and they want a nation that is dominated by fear. They want a cycle of revenge, and they want escalation of the conflict. Is it any wonder that ISIS hate our values? Remember how we felt when the body of Aylan Kurdi, a 3-year-old boy, a refugee, washed up on a Mediterranean beach many months ago. How millions of people across Europe demanded that we opened our borders and let the refugees in. It's no coincidence that in the days that followed, it was followed by a terrorist attack by ISIS, because they wanted Europe to shut our borders and to dispense with our humanity out of fear. But the time has come that we must have also the courage to ask the questions, even if we are shouted down. It makes me sick to hear Theresa May talk of ideology, to cry tears for the children massacred in Manchester, when only a few weeks ago she was in Saudi Arabia selling weapons to Yemeni children, supplying weapons to Saudi Arabia, which sponsors extremism, which sponsors the like of ISIS. And just before the election, she attacked a man called Jeremy Corbyn, who is an honourable man who has spent a lifetime fighting for peace and against illegal wars. Yet she used Manchester, she used London to warn us of a coalition of chaos propped up by terrorist sympathisers. The only problem is she didn't tell us that after the election she would be leading it because she wanted a seat in number 10. If we want a long-term solution, then the double standards and the hypocrisy must stop. Of course the Muslim community has a responsibility to call out the terrorists and the extremists in their midst, but we have no immunity from the bombs. We have no immunity from the bullets. Our children, our families travel on the same transport, they use the same airports, the same buses and the same bridges, and they are just as likely to be killed by the bombs and the bullets. But we have the right to ask, why, when those responsible for the attacks in London and Manchester were reported repeatedly by the Muslim community to the security services, when they were banned by the mosques, what exactly were the security services doing? Theresa May has failed the nation. She has failed the victims who lost their lives. She was a failure in 6 years as Home Secretary, and she was a failure as a Prime Minister, and we need long-term solutions. We want resources for the police to fight terror, and that doesn't mean axing 20,000 police officers. I want our security services to have the necessary power to do that job, but that doesn't mean ripping up the Human Rights Act, which is what differentiates us from the regimes like Saudi Arabia. And if we really want to drain the cesspit from which the extremists recruit, then we must deal with our foreign policy that wines and dines the butchers of the Middle East, arms them, and then looks the other way when they carry out their atrocities, which lead to a terror attack on an hourly basis, which means that families that are no different to those in Manchester or London flee Syria, flee Iraq, Somalia, Libya, because they also want freedom. They also want security for their families. And as a Muslim, but also as a human being, I stand in solidarity with the victims of all terror attacks, whether it be in London, Manchester, Paris, Kabul or Lahore. I will not apologise for the action of a bunch of despicable criminals masquerading as Muslims. They are no more Muslims than the Ku Klux Klan claim to represent Christianity. So, to close, I want to say, let us celebrate what we are in this society. Let us stand in solidarity with the victims of the attack and make sure those responsible for these attacks get justice, but never allow a tiny number of psychopathic maniacs to divide us or to shut down our humanity and compassion. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, Aamer.